Mina, an 11-year-old black girl, walked into the classroom that morning, her steps slower than usual. She kept her head lowered, her eyes avoiding everyone around her. As she moved to her seat, it was hard not to notice the bruises on her arms. They were darker, more pronounced than before, and seemed to tell a story that Mina had been trying to keep hidden for far too long. Her teacher, Miss Turner, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease as she watched the young girl. Mina had always been quiet, withdrawn, and distant, but today something was different. The bruises on her arms weren't just physical, they seemed to echo an inner turmoil that was far more difficult to hide. Mina sat down quickly, pulling her arms tightly against her body as if trying to shield herself from the world. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, her classmates, her teacher, no one. Her thick, unruly hair hung down over her face, partially obscuring her features, but even that couldn't hide the tension in her small, hunched frame. Miss Turner noticed the subtle way Mina avoided being seen, how she flinched slightly whenever someone got too close, how she kept her shoulders hunched as if trying to become smaller, invisible. She had seen these signs before. There had been times when Mina seemed distracted, distant, and quiet, but the teacher had never seen her like this, so physically withdrawn, so clearly in pain. A rush of concern filled Miss Turner's chest. Her mind raced with questions, but she knew she had to be careful. Mina had always been secretive about her life outside of school, but the bruises told a different story. Miss Turner decided to watch her closely today, to find a way to speak with her in private. The teacher couldn't ignore the deep worry building inside her. Something was wrong, and she knew she couldn't wait any longer to help. Mina needed someone to notice, someone to listen, to understand what had been happening when no one was looking. The teachers and staff at the school began to notice something was off with Mina over time. At first, they thought it might just be a phase, maybe something temporary, but the signs were becoming more and more apparent. Mina, usually a bright and curious girl, had become oddly withdrawn. She wasn't as engaged in her lessons, her usually sharp responses and eager hand-raising had faded into silence. She spent most of her time sitting quietly at her desk, staring out of the window or fidgeting nervously with her hands. Her classmates, who used to play and chat with her during breaks, were starting to notice that Mina had begun avoiding them, slipping away to the edges of the playground or retreating to a quiet corner during lunch. Her teachers first noticed it in the classroom. She had always been a student who asked questions, who interacted with her peers, and showed interest in the lessons. But now, Mina seemed distant, her gaze unfocused, and she answered questions with a hollow tone. Her grades, too, had started to slip. No longer the eager student who often finished her work early, she now seemed to rush through assignments, her handwriting sloppy and hurried. Her teachers couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Then one morning, as the school day started, a teacher noticed Mina standing alone on the edge of the schoolyard during recess, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her head bowed low, and her eyes downcast. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Mina was always an independent child, but this time, there was something different about the way she stood, something guarded and sad. The teacher hesitated for a moment, watching from a distance, but then she noticed the faint but unmistakable marks on Mina's arm. It was only a glimpse, but there was no mistaking it, bruises, dark and swollen, around her wrist, like she had been gripped too tightly by something, or someone. The teacher's heart sank. She couldn't ignore it any longer. This wasn't just a phase, something was deeply wrong. But she also knew that Mina was a girl who kept to herself, someone who wasn't quick to open up. Mina had always been strong-willed, a girl who preferred to handle things on her own. Confronting her directly might only make things worse, so the teacher decided to take a more cautious approach. She discreetly spoke to the other teachers about what she had observed, and they all agreed something had to be done. It was clear now that Mina was struggling, but what was even clearer was that she needed help. Instead of confronting Mina about the bruises right away, they decided to approach her in a more subtle and caring way. The last thing they wanted was for her to feel cornered or unsafe. They didn't want to push her too hard, but they knew they couldn't let this go on any longer without offering support. So, the teachers made sure to check in on her more frequently, providing small, gentle opportunities for her to speak up, letting her know she wasn't alone, and that they were there for her if she needed anything. They hoped that, in time, Mina would feel safe enough to share what had been happening. But each day, the teacher's concern grew. Mina's eyes seemed even more distant, and the physical signs of distress, like the bruises and the way she kept herself so guarded, told them all they needed to know. It was only a matter of time before they would need to step in, to offer the protection and care that Mina so desperately needed, but for now, they would be patient, waiting for the moment when Mina would finally feel ready to open up. Mina appeared visibly frightened, a deep sense of anxiety clouding her every action. The moment anyone glanced in her direction, her eyes darted nervously, desperately trying to avoid contact. Her usual confidence was replaced by a quiet unease, as though the world around her had become a place she no longer felt safe in. During class, she no longer raised her hand to answer questions, even when the answers came easily to her. She sat hunched over her desk, her hands clenched tightly, as if she could will herself to disappear into the chair. Her eyes stayed on her notebook, but her thoughts were distant, lost in the overwhelming sense of fear that had settled in her chest. When the teacher walked by, Mina's body instinctively shrank back, her gaze flicking upward for a second before quickly lowering again, as if she feared even the slightest attention would bring unwanted consequences. Her usual bright smile was absent, replaced by a tense expression of uncertainty. She barely made eye contact with her peers, and when they called her name, it was almost as though she hadn't heard them at all. She gave only a brief, almost imperceptible nod, then turned away, retreating deeper into herself. At recess, Mina became even more withdrawn. While her classmates played and laughed, she lingered at the edges of the group, quietly distancing herself. She found a quiet corner of the playground, away from the chaos, where she could sit in isolation. Her legs drawn up to her chest, she hugged her knees tightly as though the pressure would give her some comfort. Her eyes remained fixed on the ground, but she was not really looking at anything. Her thoughts, filled with apprehension, swirled, and every time someone came near, her body flinched instinctively, as though she feared being touched or spoken to. Even when her closest friends came over, Mina couldn't bring herself to smile or respond with her usual warmth. She felt the distance growing between her and everyone else, not just physically but emotionally. They could not see the invisible wall she had built around herself, but Mina could feel it. Fear had become her constant companion, and in its grip, Mina was slowly shrinking, unsure of how to break free from the prison of silence and isolation she had found herself trapped in. The wounds on Mina's body were impossible to ignore. She had tried to conceal them under layers of clothing, hoping no one would notice the bruises and cuts that marred her skin. But despite her efforts, the pain lingered, not just in her body, but deep within her soul. One fateful morning, as she walked into class, a sleeve of her long shirt accidentally slid up, revealing a deep purple bruise on her wrist. Her classmate, seated nearby, immediately noticed, their eyes wide with concern. Mina instinctively pulled her sleeve back down, a flush creeping up her neck, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Her classmate hesitated for a moment, their gaze fixed on her. "Mina, is everything okay?" they asked softly, voice filled with genuine worry. Mina's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and anxiety surging through her. She quickly shook her head, not trusting her own voice to answer. She wouldn't let anyone see her weakness, especially not here, in front of everyone. So, she just nodded and turned her attention back to the lesson, pretending everything was normal, even though her entire body was shaking with the effort of keeping up the facade. But her classmate was persistent. After the bell rang, they caught up with Mina in the hallway. "Mina, please," they urged, a quiet urgency in their tone. "You don't have to pretend. I saw the bruise. You can tell me what happened." Mina felt her chest tighten, her throat constricting as the truth pushed against the walls she had carefully built around herself. She looked away, unwilling to meet their eyes, her face flushed with shame. She wanted to scream, to beg for help, but the words felt foreign, stuck in her throat like a knot she couldn't undo. After a long, suffocating silence, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the very act of voicing her pain would break something inside her. It's my mom," she muttered, the words heavy with sorrow. Her eyes were downcast, her hands trembling at her sides. "She's angry all the time. Nothing I do is good enough. I don't know why. I try to be perfect, but I always fail her." Her voice cracked with the weight of the emotions she had never allowed herself to feel before. Mina swallowed hard, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't cry. Not now, not here. Her classmate reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The gesture was small, but it felt like a lifeline in the overwhelming darkness Mina had been carrying alone for so long. "Mina, you don't deserve this. No one should treat you like that," her classmate said softly, their voice filled with concern. But Mina shook her head, her mind spinning. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared all the time. Every day is a nightmare. I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to make things worse." She glanced up, her eyes meeting her classmates for a brief moment, before looking away again, as if afraid to face the truth any longer. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by a burden she couldn't put into words. For the first time, she had shared her pain, but it didn't bring the relief she had hoped for. Instead, it left her feeling more vulnerable, more exposed than she had ever been. Mina wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear, she couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. Mina was finally rescued from the abuse, but the road to healing was not straightforward. When the moment of truth came, it was her classmates who could no longer ignore the signs of her suffering. The bruises, the scars, there was no way to hide them anymore. They gathered the courage to speak out, reporting what they had seen to the teachers and staff. The school quickly took action, and the discovery of Mina's injuries sent a shockwave through everyone who had once been unaware of her pain. When the police arrived at her home, Mina felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Her heart raced in her chest, and her hands trembled. She had been living in fear for so long, always wondering what would happen if someone found out the truth. Now that it was happening, she felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief because the nightmare was finally being exposed, and terror because she feared her mother's wrath for betraying her. She imagined the punishment that would come once the authorities left, and the cruel words her mother would say. She feared being blamed for everything, for tearing apart the fragile world that had kept her under control for so long. But then, something shifted inside her. For the first time in years, Mina felt the weight lifting, even if just a little. The walls she had built around herself, walls that had protected her from the worst of the pain, were starting to crack. She had no choice but to speak the truth. As the officers asked her questions, she felt a wave of uncertainty, but also something else, a faint spark of courage she hadn't known was there. For the first time, someone was asking her how she felt, how she had been treated. For the first time, she was seen, not as a burden or an invisible child, but as someone worthy of care and attention. Mina was taken to a child protection center, where she was given the space to heal physically and emotionally. The process was slow, and every day felt like a battle between her past and the hope of a new life. At night, she would still wake up in cold sweats, haunted by the memories of her mother's cruel words and harsh punishments. There were days when the sadness weighed heavily on her heart, and she wondered if she could ever truly be free of the scars that had been left on her soul. But with time, the care of those around her, people who genuinely wanted to help, began to make a difference. She started to realize that safety wasn't just a temporary escape, it was something she could fight for, something worth holding on to. Mina slowly began to trust again, learning what it meant to laugh without fear of punishment, to sleep without anticipating a sudden outburst. The shadows of her past didn't vanish overnight, but they became more bearable with each passing day. Even though her recovery was far from complete, a small but powerful part of Mina began to believe in the possibility of a better life. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a future not defined by fear and pain, but by love and hope. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when it felt like the weight of her past would drag her down, but she no longer had to face it alone. With the support of those who genuinely cared for her, Mina found strength she never knew she had. And although the road ahead was still long, she now believed that one day, she would be able to rebuild her life, piece by piece. The process of assessing and safeguarding Mina was an emotionally complex and exhausting experience. As soon as Mina was removed from her home and brought to the Child Protection Center, she was met with a team of compassionate doctors and social workers who would become her pillars of support. However, the journey to safety and healing wasn't easy, especially for Mina, whose world had been shrouded in fear and pain for so long. Mina's body bore the marks of years of abuse, bruises, cuts, and scars that told stories of untold suffering. The medical examination was thorough, but every touch, every probe, caused Mina to flinch, her mind racing with memories of the hands that had hurt her before. Her breaths were shallow, her body stiff, as she fought to suppress the overwhelming anxiety threatening to consume her. She was afraid that the slightest movement or expression would reveal the truth of her brokenness. Despite the kindness of the doctors, Mina was hesitant to speak. Her mind was clouded with fear, and the weight of shame made her feel small, insignificant. When asked about the abuse, her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. She struggled to find the words, her thoughts scattered and trapped in a loop of pain. Each question seemed to bring up more memories, each answer seemed like a betrayal of the life she once tried to protect. She had been taught for so long to keep quiet, to hide the hurt, to believe that it was her fault. It was hard for her to trust anyone, let alone share the secrets that had lived inside her for so many years. But the team was patient. They never rushed her or pushed too hard. Slowly, with gentle encouragement, Mina began to open up, piece by piece. She told them of the terrifying nights spent cowering under her blanket, of the harsh words that cut deeper than any physical wound. She spoke of the loneliness, the sense of worthlessness that had plagued her every moment. The more she spoke, the more Mina realized that she wasn't alone anymore, that the people around her genuinely cared, and that she didn't have to carry her pain in silence. Despite the healing process being long and painful, Mina started to feel a shift inside her. At night, she still lay awake, her mind racing with memories of fear and hurt, but during the day, there were small moments where she felt safe, moments where she allowed herself to believe that it was possible for her to be loved and protected. The psychological support she received helped her understand that she wasn't responsible for the pain she had endured and that she deserved to feel safe, to feel happy, to feel seen. The fear that had once paralyzed Mina began to ebb away, though not entirely. She still flinched at loud noises or sudden movements, and she still woke up in the middle of the night with a heart racing in terror. Yet, with every therapy session, every moment of care and understanding from the people around her, Mina slowly built the courage to trust again. The scars on her body were beginning to heal, but the scars on her heart took time to mend. It was a fragile process, one where every small victory felt like a huge leap toward the future she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. As Mina learned to trust, to accept help, and to confront her fears, she found herself realizing that her story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. For the first time, she started to imagine a life beyond the abuse, a life where she could be free, where she could laugh without fear, where she could love without hesitation. She began to understand that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, but about learning to rebuild from the inside out. The people who surrounded Mina were more than just experts, they were the light in the darkness, helping her navigate through the confusion and terror she had lived with for so long. The process of evaluating and protecting Mina was not just about examining her physical injuries, but about guiding her on a path toward healing and recovery. Through every step, Mina's resilience grew, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she began to see that there was hope beyond the pain. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she believed that her future could be filled with love, safety, and happiness. Mina's life shifted dramatically when she was finally adopted, the painful chapter of her past slowly fading into a distant memory, though not without leaving its marks. After months of living in a state of fear and uncertainty, her newfound family became her anchor, an unexpected source of warmth and hope. It wasn't an immediate transformation. Mina's past had shaped her deeply, and the road to healing was neither short nor easy. But the process of adoption, with its paperwork and careful evaluations, signified something that Mina had never thought possible: the chance for a fresh start. The day she officially became part of her new family was a moment of mixed emotions for Mina. She had learned to expect the worst from people, to protect herself at all costs, and yet here she was, standing before a loving couple, people who promised to care for her, no matter her past. Her heart raced, unsure of what to feel. Part of her wanted to pull back, to hold on to the walls she'd so carefully built around herself, yet another part of her longed to believe that this time, perhaps, someone would be different. Her new parents, understanding the fragility of her situation, were patient beyond measure. They never pushed her, never rushed her into accepting the love they offered. They simply waited, allowing Mina the time she needed to process, to breathe. They listened when she spoke and, perhaps more importantly, when she didn't. There were days when Mina would retreat to her room, where she would stare out of the window, lost in her thoughts, unsure of how to navigate the overwhelming emotions swirling within her. Her room was her safe haven, a sanctuary she could retreat to when the world felt too big and too frightening. The walls, painted a soft blue, held a sense of calm. The bed, carefully made with her favorite blankets, felt like a small fortress where she could hide from her memories. The bookshelf, stocked with books that allowed her to escape to faraway lands, gave her the comfort of a world outside the pain she carried. Yet even in this sanctuary, the weight of her past sometimes felt unbearable. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the vivid memories of her abuse flooding back with terrifying clarity. But when she cried, her parents were there, quiet, patient, and gentle. They never tried to stop the tears, they simply held her, allowing her to feel everything she had locked away for so long. It wasn't just Mina's room that had changed, the entire house began to feel like a place of possibility. The clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the sound of laughter during family dinners, the comforting embrace of her new parents, all of these things were new and foreign to her. But slowly, day by day, she began to understand that they were not fleeting. She began to learn that her family wasn't going to vanish or disappoint her like the people in her past had. However, the road to healing wasn't linear. There were days when Mina retreated deep into herself, when the weight of the past felt unbearable. But with each passing week, she started to feel more comfortable in her new life. Her parents didn't ask her to forget, didn't try to force her to be normal. They simply loved her where she was, accepting the moments of silence, but also rejoicing in the quiet victories. When Mina shared a story she'd written, a piece of herself she'd kept hidden for so long, it was a breakthrough. Her parents were overjoyed, encouraging her to express herself further, even when it was hard for her to articulate everything she had been through. As time went on, the healing began to show in the smallest of moments, the way Mina now smiled, though it was still tinged with caution, when her parents hugged her goodnight, the tentative laughter that escaped her lips during game nights. She began to open up slowly, sharing more about her likes and dislikes, about the things she once thought were unimportant. For the first time, Mina began to understand the power of love, not just as a concept, but as something tangible that she could feel in her heart. Her new family wasn't perfect, but they were perfect for her. They didn't try to fix her, they simply gave her the space and support she needed to heal. The adoption, with its final legalities and official declarations, didn't erase her trauma, but it gave her something far more important: a chance. A chance to build something new, to forge relationships based on trust and respect. She had a family who saw her, who didn't shy away from her pain but instead embraced it, knowing it was part of who she was. In the months that followed, Mina's life transformed, not in grand gestures but in the quiet, everyday moments. Her parents, unwavering in their love, helped her build a future. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was slowly learning to live again. There were setbacks, days when the darkness seemed to overtake her, but there were also moments of joy, small, flickering lights that reminded her that healing was possible. Mina had been given the chance to rewrite her story, and with each passing day, she moved a little closer to the girl she had always been beneath the scars, the girl she was learning to love again. The journey wasn't over, and perhaps it never would be. But for the first time, Mina believed in the possibility of a future, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a family who would never leave her side. The love and care from Mina's new family became her anchor, a lifeline that pulled her out of the storm of trauma she had lived through. Each day, as the sun rose, Mina woke up to a world that felt strange yet safe. For so long, she had feared the coldness and neglect that defined her previous life. But here, in her new home, there was warmth in every corner. Every soft word, every gentle touch, and every shared meal spoke of a care she had never known. At first, it was hard for her to believe. She had been conditioned to expect disappointment, to believe that love was fleeting and easily taken away. But slowly, ever so slowly, her heart began to trust again. In the beginning, Mina kept her distance. She was hesitant, unsure whether it was real, the kindness they showed her. She still flinched at raised voices, even when the tone was nothing but friendly. She couldn't fully grasp the concept of being safe. The ghosts of her past haunted her every time she let her guard down, making her question if her new family would one day abandon her, just like the ones before. There were days when she locked herself in her room, unwilling to face anyone, afraid that if she allowed herself to feel too much, the pain would come rushing back. She sat in silence, her thoughts heavy and tangled, unsure how to express the gratitude and fear swirling inside her. But her new family never gave up on her. They understood her silence. They gave her time, not rushing her to be anything other than what she was, a scared, broken little girl trying to piece together the fragments of her soul. The small gestures mattered. The way they always made sure she had what she needed, but never pushed her to open up before she was ready. Her adoptive mother, with her warm smile, would often leave a little note on Mina's pillow, a simple reminder that she was loved and cherished. Her adoptive father would take time to sit with her, quietly reading beside her, never forcing conversation but always there, offering comfort just by being present. One evening, when Mina had a particularly vivid nightmare, her father came into her room, sitting by her side until she fell back asleep, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent promise that she would never face anything alone again. This simple act, the act of showing up, was the moment when Mina began to soften. Slowly, she started to let the warmth of their love in, and with it, began to let go of the tension she had carried for so long. It wasn't easy. Some nights, she would still wake up in a cold sweat, her mind racing with memories of the past. But when she looked around, she would see her family there, a steady presence of support. Over time, Mina began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. There were no more dark corners in her heart, no more space for fear to creep in unnoticed. Her new family didn't just fill her with care, they made her believe in the possibility of a future where she could be happy, where she could dream. They encouraged her to try new things, to open herself up to the world in ways she had never dared to before. Whether it was enrolling her in a dance class she had always wanted to try, or taking her on trips to places that made her feel alive and free, they made sure she knew that she was worthy of happiness, that her past didn't define her future. In the midst of all this love, Mina began to smile more often. At first, the smiles were tentative, shy, unsure. But little by little, as she allowed herself to be loved and cared for, those smiles grew brighter, more confident. She began to share her thoughts, her fears, and her dreams with her new family. She no longer felt like a stranger in her own home. Her heart, once closed off and battered, was slowly healing, one moment of love at a time. She knew that the road to healing wouldn't be without its struggles, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came next, surrounded by a family who would never leave her. Her new family didn't just give her a place to live, they gave her a reason to live, to hope, and to believe that she deserved all the love the world had to offer. And with each passing day, Mina knew that she was no longer alone. She was home. Mina started her new life, and every moment of it was filled with both excitement and uncertainty. The contrast between her past and present was stark. She had gone from the darkness of neglect and fear to the light of safety and care. The first few weeks felt surreal. Mina would wake up in the morning, eyes still heavy from the weight of her past, only to realize that she was no longer in danger. The bed she slept in was soft, and the house around her was filled with warmth, not just from the heater but from the love and affection that her new family gave her. At first, Mina struggled to adjust. It wasn't easy to trust again, especially after everything she had been through. When she walked into her new school, her heart raced with anxiety. She had been so used to keeping to herself, to hiding away from the world, that talking to others felt like a challenge. Her classmates noticed the quiet girl with the sad eyes, and some of them tried to reach out to her. Mina would smile back, but it was a small smile, hesitant, unsure whether she was deserving of such kindness. She would turn her gaze downward, unsure of how to express herself. However, something shifted as the days went by. The warmth and patience of her new family seeped into her bones, and slowly, the walls around her heart began to crumble. When they took her on outings, when they helped her with homework, and when they made her laugh over simple things, Mina started to feel something she hadn't known in so long: hope. The world didn't seem as scary anymore. Her new family didn't just protect her from harm, they gave her something more: understanding, patience, and a belief in her potential. It wasn't just her family who helped her heal. As she spent more time with her classmates, Mina began to realize that she could trust them too. The more they tried to get to know her, the more she saw that they weren't like the people who had hurt her in the past. They genuinely cared. She began to join in their games, share her thoughts, and slowly open up to the idea of friendship. Mina found herself laughing more, her shoulders relaxing as the burden of fear lifted from her chest. But it was the quiet moments with her family that meant the most. Sitting around the dinner table, surrounded by laughter and conversation, Mina would watch her new parents exchange looks of love and pride, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of belonging. She knew that they weren't just taking care of her, they were accepting her as their own. She wasn't just a child they were responsible for anymore, she was their daughter, and that thought brought an overwhelming sense of peace. The love they gave her was not conditional, not temporary, it was forever. She had a family who believed in her, who saw her not as the broken child from her past, but as the bright, strong girl she was becoming. Mina's journey of healing had only just begun, but for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She knew that she was no longer alone. The love she received from her new family and the kindness she found in her new friends gave her the courage to face each new day with hope. She understood that although the past would always be a part of her, it didn't define her. She was free to grow, to dream, and to become everything she had once thought impossible. And with every step she took, Mina realized that she had a future filled with endless possibilities.